What Jeremiah is doing here in Jeremiah chapter 4, he's actually witnessing the encroaching Babylonians on the city of Jerusalem. And people are freaking out because, you know, the army of the most powerful empire in the world has surrounded your city and they're going to destroy it. And in his anguish, Jeremiah's basically telling people this is awful and this is your fault, according to God. And this is what's going to happen to you. And at one point, starting in, let's start in verse 21, chapter 4, 21. And this is the Jewish Publication Society translation I'm reading from here. How long must I see standards and hear the blare of horns? For my people are stupid. They give me no heed. They are foolish children. They are not intelligent. They are clever at doing wrong, but unable to do right. Then he says, starting in verse 23, I look at the earth. It is unformed and void. At the skies, and their light is gone. I look at the mountains, they are quaking, and the hills are rocking. I look, no man is left, and all the birds of the sky have fled. I look at the farmland is a desert, and all the towns are in ruin because of Yahweh, because of his blazing anger. So you can hear in there that Jeremiah is he's pointing to like the order of creation as it's presented in Genesis 1. The earth is formless and void. Then there's light. There's earth. There's birds in the heavens. And he's turning this on its head in such a way that it's like an uncreation. This event with the Babylonians, coming in on Jerusalem, for him and for the people, this was like the end of the world. It was like a total undoing of creation. But an interesting question is raised here about his usage of this text. Because what we know about Jeremiah was probably a Levite,
right?
Which means that he comes from a different priestly group than those who are associated with the pre-creation account, with the priestly material in the Pentateuch. And perhaps hostile to there's some tension between these two priestly groups. Priestly polemics in the Bible and then in the Second Temple period is phenomenally interesting. I'm just going to say that. But there's possibly is one of the interesting questions to pose of his allusion to this creation story is this a polemic at work here? Is he turning the creation story on its head, in part also to sort of ridicule or point to the problems with the Aaronic priests, the Bnei Acharon, the sons of Aaron, who are part of this other priestly group? For me, it's a very interesting question. And we see Jeremiah do something like this elsewhere in the text, where he will he'll take a selection of scripture and kind of turn it on its head ironically as a way to
the New Testament does that with the Old Testament, or lots of sources that it's drawing from. It kind of flips things to mean give its own context. But something interesting I was going to say, if he's quoting Genesis 1, from what I was told, and maybe you can dispel this for me, this is just an interesting thought experiment. Genesis 1 seems to tie in with Genesis 6 in that it sounds very flood narrative-like. And so here you have a potential destruction of, God's about to do some judgment here. I wonder if Jeremiah is trying to draw from that kind of source,
Totally. And I mean, in his mind, in the mind of in my estimation, in the mind of the people who are living in the city of Jerusalem at the time this was happening, this is what it was. In their minds, this was the total annihilation of their world. It was coming to an end.
Wow.
And with how seriously, with how much value large segments of the Jewish population set on the Jerusalem temple and on its importance and its entire significance, once the Babylonians started to take this building apart and take all the valuables out of it, what do they start to think at this point?
The end of the world. Like
it is the end. The prophecies have failed. The kingdom, the dynasty, the Yahweh's dynasty that he set up for eternity has come to an end. What does that do to a person?
That's a great point. Have you heard of that book, When Prophecy Failed?
Yeah, I haven't read it yet.
Oh, bro, I got it in my room. I'll be honest, it's a little dry, but it's super educational, and it's all about the Old Testament prophetic situations. And you're nailing the coffin shut right here, because it's like the Millerite movement. The end is about to happen in 1844, and sure enough, when it didn't happen, two things happened. One group said we got the date wrong. We're mistaken somehow. The other side said it did happen in some spiritual sense. So part of me wonders if this failure, constantly prophets come back, new texts are approaching, redactors probably add in there. And an angel of the Lord said, it will be 70 years, in fact, when you will be brought back. And da-da-da-da-da. And then it was like, well, not 70 years, Daniel says, 70 times 7 or 70 weeks. It's like, bro, really?
Oh, yeah.
I love this, man. I love this.
And, and that's exactly. So what happened as a result of that? The Torah, essentially, happened as a result of that. I mean, and then early Judaism happened as a result of that, where, like you said, so many ongoing questions about dating or about things that were supposed to take place. It's interesting, actually. The 70 years prophecy from Jeremiah is something that I think was misunderstood from the beginning. Jeremiah is not, his prophecy there is not one of where he set his focus on the expectation of return. As I read it, what he's writing, so it takes place within a letter that he has sent to the exiles who are already in Babylon, right? And what does he tell in that letter? He says, relax, plant your fields, live your lives, because you're going to be there for a while. You're going to be there for like 70 years. So I don't think this is Jeremiah saying, don't worry, it's coming to an end. This is Jeremiah saying, no, man, you're stuck there for a while. But because of the way that interpreters, because of the way biblical language works, because of the way people inherited these texts and the value that they imbued to them and how they figured you needed to read them, this becomes something else entirely, right?
Even
this
for Daniel, right? So
exactly.
Would you agree that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Totally. And what Daniel is doing is or what the Hasmoneans in the 160s are doing with Daniel is saying, well, we've got this prophecy, which wasn't really even a prophecy. It was, we've got this return prophecy, and yes, that happened. The Jews came back, even though it wasn't actually 70 years, but who's counting? And yes, they rebuilt the temple, but why is there so much why is there so much crap still going on? And why are, why Antiochus the Fourth, who came in and desecrated the temple? There's all these other questions that demand answers. And as a result, you've got to impose a whole new way of understanding the 70 years. You develop a whole new calendar as a result. It becomes a point of divine revelation. The angel Gabriel comes and basically tells Daniel how to interpret the text. And what's really cool is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, this 490 years is something that they go steps further with. It shows up in several texts, and there's different ways of organizing the 490 years. There's different ways of counting them from start to finish. It explodes into this whole new interpretive movement on what to do with a lot of this stuff. One of the things that I've already decided I'm going to do in the future when I'm finished with the documentary hypothesis videos is I'm going to do a whole bunch of Dead Sea Scrolls videos. But one of the things that I'm going to do is focus on Daniel, because what I've discovered is the Dead Sea Scrolls are fertile ground. Like, apologists love the Dead Sea Scrolls because they're super old, right? And because they preserve our oldest copies of scripture. So, they make some sort of statements about the reliability of scripture. And they love the fact that there's copies of the book of Daniel in the Dead Sea Scrolls, because it shows that people were taking this stuff seriously, the book of Daniel, really early. Like, I think our oldest copy of the book of Daniel dates to like the beginning of the 1st century BC, which would have been within decades after parts of Daniel were written. So this apologists love this stuff. But what gets ignored is the nature of how the texts of Daniel appear in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of them are complete. The complete ones are a little bit later, but some of them not necessarily. I mean, maybe they were only just chunks. I don't know if you're familiar with the scholarly ideas about how Daniel developed, but there's a whole bunch of individual chunks of literature that was put together over a longer period of time, right? Right. What's really interesting is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we don't just have Daniel, we have all this other really intriguing Aramaic literature featuring Daniel, or people who look a lot like Daniel doing things that Daniel did. Right. But and it's all like it's a treasure trove all about the historical development of the book of Daniel, which emphatically shows that no, there's no way a completed book of Daniel was written before the Persian period. So
100%, and that dating annihilates the value of this being prophetic. And then the New Testament, just what it does for me once you see this is it like a tidal wave on the whole. Whoever used this after it falls into the ignorant category. And I don't mean that derogatorily. I mean that like when the book of Revelation is using this we know feld and not really written when it says it's supposedly written text, what's that do with your understanding of things in the New Testament? It should cause you to go, oh my goodness, there's this problem. I was going to show you something here real quick that you harped on for 490 years. I actually made this a while back after reading John J. Collins' The Apocalyptic Imagination. And here he quotes...
That's a great book, by the way.
For real, man. That was over my head in many ways. But 1 QP Habakkuk 7, 6 through 13. For there is yet a vision coming. Anyway, in this particular, it's using the 490 years. It says this passage implies that the end is delayed and had not come when initially expected about 40 years after the death of the teacher. And I asked him when he thought who the teacher was. He said, I'm not going to even guess because no one knows who the teacher of righteousness was in this. There might have been many teachers of righteousness for all we know. And, that's just kind of a mystery. They didn't use names, but they keep rehashing this. And Daniel expected it to happen in his day, just like Jeremiah expected it to happen in his day, just like the New Testament is expected. And it just keeps going.
I often thought that there is a subconscious, if you're part of a prophetic movement, so maybe it's less so now, but I think certainly in antiquity, and this is just the way that I'm reading things, I've often wondered about who these people were and how they thought and went about doing the stuff that they do. And I've often wondered if one of the reasons for using the symbolism and couching all your stuff in this vague language and using big round numbers or target dates that can be, reorganized. Is this subconsciously part of the recognition that the way in which this is going to work is if it could be attached loosely to whatever in the future? Right. I've often wondered if part of prophecy, part of the reason, totally, yeah, like, and something I mentioned this in my third video, but there's something that is really, I guess that was the fourth video. It was the introduction to the documentary hypothesis video. Right. Something that I key on, which I think is really important when it comes to reading the Bible and reading how biblical authors used the Bible and read the Bible, is to focus on what James Kugel called the four assumptions of biblical interpretation. And it helps to explain why so much of the weird shit happens in the New Testament that we see. Like Matthew, what the hell is he doing in the infancy narratives in Matthew? He's like pulling all these texts of scripture out and saying, this is the fulfillment of prophecy. This was fulfilled in Jesus. This is what it said in the scriptures. And when you sit down and you look at the texts themselves, as a modern reader, you go, I mean, it doesn't really say that, or at least those are the words, but has nothing to do with who Jesus was. Like the Isaiah chapter 9 prophecy. That's it. When that was written, it had to do with knowing the time frame of when Assyria was going to invade, right? Like, it has absolutely nothing at all to do with the Messiah. But this is how, and this is something that wasn't invented by the New Testament authors. Right. This is an inherited thing. Like this is the matrix in which the Jews operated in, and we see this throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls, where every single text, if it's scripture, whatever that is, and there's lively debates in my circles about what scripture was, how ancient authors understood it, how they defined it, what they included within it, what they did with it. But one of the things that they came to understand scripture to be, like almost universally, was that it was a collection of all this cryptic cryptic coded messages for the future. And not just the obvious stuff, but every single text. So when you go through something like the Pesher Habakkuk, which is what Collins was quoting from there.
Right.
I don't know if you've read it, but from start to end, it's not complete. It's only it's fragmentary, right? So it's just going through the text of Habakkuk. It cites a passage from Habakkuk, and then it says the interpretation of this passage is when the teacher of righteousness entered the temple and confronted the wicked priest.
So it's doing the same thing the New Testament's doing in a way.
Exactly the same thing. And it's the most benign, most mundane stuff that, like, to our eye, but because it's scripture, it means something to me today. And that's like one of the fundamental keys for understanding scripture from the perspective of those who wrote the Gospels, from those first Christians, from the people in and around Palestine from that period, was that all of this stuff means something to me now. So they're primed for it. They're looking for it. Paul does this. At one point in the book of Romans, he quotes from Deuteronomy, and just does this. Well, he quotes from all sorts of scripture in Romans. I think it's like 9 through 11 is just a cavalcade of scripture quotations from Paul, but he's doing this all the time, where he's just pulling stuff out. Completely, as we would say, completely out of context, but they certainly did not see it like that. Pull this stuff out completely out of context and say, this is what it means. And, and that was the proper way to do it. They were just doing what everybody else was doing. This is the way ancient Jews read their texts. So it's no wonder that we are here today, where we're at with evangelical churches, totally, because we've inherited this very ancient sense of biblical interpretation that treats the Bible like a coded message book. And that's why there's what is it? There's 116 fulfilled prophecies of Jesus?
It depends on who you ask. Some say there's 300. Some say there's just so.
But that's why there's so many.